This is your study guide for the properties, functions, and variation test. So remember, this study guide is going to be very close to what the actual test will look like. So you can watch the video as many times as you need to make sure you understand the problems. And as always, you can ask me for help. Okay, so first thing I want you to do, go ahead and read this problem. Okay, so X is referring to the amount of free fall in feet, and it says that you are free falling 700 feet. So the only thing I'm going to do is replace X with 700, and then I'm going to put this in my calculator. All right, so when you put that in, you should get about 19.84 seconds. So as long as you understand how to read the problem and what the variables stand for, you can figure out where to plug stuff in. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and read this one real quick. Okay, so D is talking about distance to the horizon. H is the height and sea level. I kind of color-coded it. So if the height is 5, I'm going to replace H with 5, and then I just plug this into my calculator. Okay, so the answer is 2.7, I'm going to round that to 4. And then if you'll notice, the question asked between which two values is the distance to the horizon. So I would say between 2 and 3. So something like that as an answer choice would be correct. Okay, so take a minute, pause the video, and read this one. Okay, so if you remember, the very first variable you get to is the one that it's going to equal. All right, and then it says varies inversely. Okay, so that's going to be K, and then inversely means divide by L. And then because you're talking about a 2-inch piece of string, that's what your K value is. So the answer is going to be S equals 2 divided by L. Alright, so B is your answer choice. Alright, so this one's very easy. All you got to do is graph it and sketch a little graph. So it should look like this. The only thing that I need to remind you at is because that like 2x is in the top, and then you have divided by, and you have x minus 1, because that's two different things in the denominator, two different terms, we're going to have to put that in parentheses. If not, your calculator is actually going to graph this, something like that, and then minus 1, which is not what you want to do, because you want the x minus 1 all together. That's why you need to put it in parentheses, and it should look like this. Alright, so go ahead and pause the video and read this one quickly. Okay, so all you're doing for this one is you're getting x by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the multiplying by 2, and you get rid of multiplication by dividing. And then the last thing I'm going to do to get rid of a square root, remember you square both sides. When you square a square root, it cancels out, so x equals 25. Okay. So you can read this one really quickly. You can pause the video if you need more time. So if you're confused by this one, what you could do is take two different values. I'm going to select the first and the last, and I'm going to plug this in. So H is standing for number of hours. So let's try the first one. 2 times 2, does that equal 1? No, so it's not the first one. And then we'll do for the second one. So 2 equals 2 times 1. Alright, so B could be an answer choice, and now I'm going to try the next one also. So P times H, 2 equals 2. That one works also. And if I try the last one, P plus 1 does not equal 2, so definitely not that one. So now we've got it down to 2, and I'm going to use, let me do this. I'm going to use this one, and I'm going to plug it into B and C and see which one works. So 0.25, does that equal 2 times 8? No, so it's not that one. And let's check to make sure that C actually works. So 8 times 0.25, that does equal 2. So C is my answer choice. So if the equation is confusing you, then use the data in the chart and plug it in and just find out which one works. Don't stop as soon as you find one that works, because just like we saw, it depends on what value you plugged in. So try some different values and just go through all the answer choices. Okay, so this one didn't talk about a lot in class, but this should be stuff that we remember. So remember, domain are your x values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to graph this really quick in my calculator and sketch graph. Okay, so it looks like this, and you can even, if you're using Desmos or if you're using a graphing calculator, you can look at the table or you can just click. That value is negative 2/3. So x is anything to the right of negative 2/3. It can also equal 2/3, so I'm going to do an equal to as well. Alright, so we should know what domain means, and then the square root function is new, so putting it together can be a little confusing. Alright, now this one's talking about the y-intercept, so I'm going to graph this, and remember the y-intercept is where it hits the y-axis, so I'm going to sketch a little graph. So I want to know where it hits the y-axis, so right there. If you're using Desmos, all you got to do is click. If you go to your table, look for when x equals 0, but the y-intercept is 2.2361. Alright. Okay, so now we're looking at range. If you remember, range is your y values, or how far up and down a graph grows. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to graph that and sketch a little graph. Alright, so it hits up at 4. So I would say my y values are anything less than or equal to 4. And I chose less than because it's going down. So if it were going up greater than 4, that's when you would do y would be greater than or equal to 4. Okay, so we got two different functions, and now we're going to look through these and see which one is true. So the first one says both functions have the same maximum value. So I'm going to graph both of them and see if they have the same maximum value. Okay, so here I've color-coded them. Do they have the same maximum value? Definitely not, because they both don't go to the highest point of the same thing. Both functions have the same domain. Definitely not. The blue one is all negative domains, and the green one is all positive domains. Okay, C says they both have a function of y-intercept of 2. Alright, and you can check that, just see where they hit the graph, and they do both hit at 2. And then it can't be all of the above because it wasn't A and B. Okay? Alright, so this one's a little difficult. So if x to the 1/3 power equals 2, what is the value of x? So if you'll remember, there's different ways to think about this. You could think about it as, remember that anything to the 1/3 power is the same as being the cube root. So the way you would get rid of a cube root would be to cube both sides. And when you cube a cube root, it's just x equals, and 2 to the 3rd power is 8. Or, you may have been taught this before or not, if I wanted to get rid of that 1/3 power, I would times it by the reciprocal, which would just be 3/1, or just 3. So remember, power to power you multiply, that would just be x to the 1st power. And then 2 to the 3rd would also be 8. So you can think about that in either way you want to. And then you could always put the left side in y1 in Desmos, and then put the right side in y2 in Desmos and see where they intersect. Or you can just type that into Desmos and it's going to be 8. Desmos is an awesome program. Okay, so pause the video and read this one really quickly. Okay, so A is talking about area of a square, and it tells us the area is 1725. So I plug that in, and all I have to do is type this into my calculator. And I get 11.99, or you can round that to 12, it's so close. Okay. So there are multiple ways to think about this one. Remember that word equivalent means equal to, so we're looking for an expression that's exactly the same as this one. Okay, so here's how I think about this. Anything to a negative power, remember we move that to the opposite place. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to move it down and make that that power positive. The next thing I'm going to do is remember that this makes like a little house. So this is the same thing as being the cube root of 8 to the 3rd power. So if you saw that answer choice, that would be perfectly fine. And then sometimes you might see that simplified, but remember this is going to be a multiple choice test, so you're looking for something close to this, maybe a little more simplified, but something that's exactly the same. So you can even like type this into your calculator and then type this one into your calculator and make sure that they both equal the same number. That's another way to find if something is equivalent to something. Okay. Alright, so here's what I would do for this one. Remember, this is a square root, and all of this is being raised to the 1 power. So when you rewrite it, remember it's going to look like 1/2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make everything to the 1/2 power. Trying to make this not look so ugly. Alright, and remember, anytime you do a power to a power, that's being multiplied. So right here is just a number. We can do that really quickly. 36 and 1/2 is just 6. Alright, if I multiply these together, I get m to the 2nd. If I multiply these together, I get p to the 4th. And if I multiply these together, I get q to the 3rd. I don't see anything else that needs to be moved because of negative exponents. I don't see anything that being simplified. So that would be an equivalent expression to the original. Okay, so we're going to simplify this one. And you can do it kind of the same way we just did. Remember, this is a square root, and this is like everything to the 1st power. So when you build the little house, that's 1/2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make everything to the 1/2 power. And remember, anytime you have a power to a power, you multiply. So this is just a number. 36 to the 1/2 is 6x. 6 times 1/2 is 3. I don't see anything else that I could do and go further, so that's my answer. Okay, alright, so this is from that properties of rational and irrational, which I really hate, but we have to learn it. So a rectangle had side lengths of 3 and 5. Which statement must be true about the area of the rectangle? So if I multiply 3 and 5, I get 15. So it's definitely a rational number. And that comes from that property of if you have a rational times a rational, you're always going to have a rational. Oh, I don't know why this page is blank. Okay. Alright, so this one, we may have even done it in our notes, but this is a released EOC problem. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to distribute, I don't know why my pen isn't working, this 1/2 to everything in the parentheses. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this. Okay, and now I'm just going to start simplifying. So 16 to the 3/2 power is 64. And then I'm going to start multiplying the exponents. Okay, oh. Well, here we go. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start combining the bases that are the same. So let me color code for a minute. Okay, so remember, if we're dividing, then we subtract our exponents. Alright, and then the last thing, remember that you can't ever have exponent that's a negative. So I'm going to leave everything that's positive up top, and then I'm going to move the y to the 12th to the bottom and change it to positive. So the answer choice is D. Alright, and that's just your property of exponents. Alright, so you read this one really quickly. Pause the video if you need extra time. Okay, so S is in miles per hour. And then you're talking about, so S is your average speed. So if you ran 26.2 miles, you would have to times that by your speed. But then you would also want to divide it by your speed, which is a little weird. So remember, it's miles per hour. So you went 26.2 miles, but you're trying to figure out how long it took you. So you would want to multiply that by the speed, by S. But then you would also want to divide it by S just to find the hour, because it's miles per, meaning division, hour. So a little weird, but the answer choice is D for this one. If that doesn't make sense, you could try to plug in some numbers and plug it into the formula and see which equation actually works. I feel like I didn't explain that well, so if you need extra help, let me know and I'll see if I can say it in another way. Okay, this is another released EOC problem. I'm going to let you pause the video and read it carefully, really quickly. Alright, so the first sentence is going to help us set up the formula. So, the force, that's the first one you come to, acting on an object varies inversely, so equals K, but we're going to divide because we're talking about inversely, to the square of its distance, R, so R squared. I'm going to change these colors to make it a little easier to see. Okay, so I tried a color code. The next sentence is going to tell us how to find the K. So when two objects are 0.64 meters apart, that's your R. The force acting on them is 8.2, that's your force. So I'm just going to plug them in. Okay, and the way I'm going to get K by itself is I'm going to multiply both sides by 0.64 squared. Okay, so K is going to be equal to 8.2 times 0.64 squared. So K is equal to 3.35872. Then, the last part is what you're actually looking for. Approximately how much force would the object feel if its distance is at 0.77 meters? So, I'll do it over here. Force equals, K is 3.35872 divided by, now it tells us our distance is 0.77, and then don't forget to square it. So I'm going to put all of that in my calculator, and I'm going to round it to 1 decimal place because that's what the answer choices look like. So my answer is B. Okay. The function blah 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 models the volume of a gas in a balloon under X units of pressure at a constant temperature. The question asks, what domain makes sense in context of this problem? So remember, domain is your X values, and you're talking about which one makes sense. So I want you to sketch the graph, and you can look at the table if you want to. Okay, so because we're talking about what makes sense, and we're talking about like an actual real life thing, we don't want anything that's negative. Also, if you'll notice, the graph never hits the x-axis. So, the best thing to say is x needs to be greater than 0. It can't equal 0 because it doesn't hit the x-axis. So that's why it's just x is greater than 0. Okay, so the question is 23. The test has 23 questions. The study guide only had 20 because some of them are very similar. So I didn't feel like I needed to do multiple examples because you have other videos that you can go back and watch. Please let me know if you have any questions, and good luck on your test.